Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me yet again, week 3 of this ongoing series. And I'm so excited to be joined by Abdullah Qureshi, who I have been very fortunate enough to work with a few times in the past. Now, Abdullah has an extensive and extremely impressive bio, and forgive me for reading parts of it just in case. But Abdullah is a curator. Sorry, first of all, he's an artist. He's also a curator. He's been a gallerist. He's a researcher. He is now completing a PhD for which he was in Helsinki for several years, and he has recently moved to Toronto. And the PhD is titled Mythological Migrations, Imagining Queer Muslim Utopias, and he examines formations of queer identity and resistance in Muslim migratory contexts. He's completing his PhD from Aalto University in Finland, and Abdullah has also been the recipient of several grants over the last couple of years, very impressive ones, the most recent being from the Kone Foundation, which is supporting his PhD. And he's moved to Toronto because he won a fellowship in 2019 as a visiting researcher at York University, which is super exciting. And now, how are you doing, Abdullah?
I'm good. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the invitation, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. But yes, I'm doing well. I mean, as well as one can be in these circumstances. I keep telling myself how lucky I am, fortunate I am to be kind of in a place where I can kind of create safety for myself. But certainly, like, there's a lot of concern when one hears the news all the time. So I'm just trying to kind of filter that out as much as possible and hoping that it will end.
Yeah, sometimes I think you have to put on blinders to just survive in many ways and make sure that you're not completely getting obsessed with reading the news, because it is important to keep your mental sanity as well in these situations and to consider that, especially as an artist. Like, I'm sure that you might, I don't know, I feel as a lot of voices must just be overwhelming at times when you do need to work, especially since you're researching right now as well, right?
I mean, there's that, and I think that even beyond being an artist, I think when your family is like far away. So my
Yeah.
family is obviously in Pakistan, and that's always kind of a concern in the back of the head, where things are managed differently there, and even though
Yeah.
the news sort of sometimes is optimistic, sometimes it's not, but you never know, and that's what's always a concern. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, how people are affected, not just my family, but friends and the general population in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So it's all of those kind of things that kind of, if you start thinking about it, then it kind of becomes an endless kind of
Cycle.
hole,
True.
that you're kind of sinking deep into.
Yeah.
So one is just trying to, I mean, I'm just literally trying to kind of keep myself busy with drawing and painting. My kind of objectives are to read and write, and then not much of that is happening. But at the very least, I'm able to kind of draw as a cathartic activity.
Well, I look forward to seeing some of those a little bit later. I thought we could start with discussing some of your larger than life, very vibrant paintings that you have, I think, become quite well known for as well. At least that's what I remember seeing the first time I met you in Lahore all of those years ago. I remember I had come to Gallery 39K to see you, and you had showed me what you were working on, and I was completely blown away by the size, the scale, the colors, everything really. So I just wanted to understand from you your journey towards those paintings and a little bit about perhaps why you use enamel paint, for example.
I think, I mean, for me, like, I think from like the earliest time in my sort of practice, which I kind of date around 2006 when I kind of joined art school. There was an interest in materiality and
Mm-hmm.
formal approaches to painting. And I was always interested. I mean, actually, even if I go before that, like, even as a kid, I think that I was less interested in detail and much more interested in the form and kind of expression. And so, you know, to give you an example, like I remember very distinctly that, you know, in art class at school, when, you know, they would put a kettle and some teapots to kind of like, you know, kettle and teacups and things like that to kind of draw a still life. And, you know, there were other students who would be kind of going into the detail of that. And I would be making the kettle so large that the handle would be going outside the page.
Yeah.
So from kind of, and I was never kind of synced in to the kind of details, but rather interested in the positive and the negative spaces of the forms. And I think that's really informed me. And I think that, I mean, I had exposure to a lot of artists. I used to go to Hunar Kada School of Art when I was like in, you know, just in my high school. I used to go and spend time over there, and Rakshanda Atwar, who I later will address as a mentor as well. But
this was in Lahore, right?
This was in Lahore, and I saw her painting, and I saw her that, you know, her style was incredibly expressionist. And that's really influenced me. And I saw her just throwing paint on paintings. And I remember coming home and, you know, found these old paints in the store and kind of just started experimenting with them. And this was around 2004, 2005 that I started playing around with emulsion and enamel and the kind of getting interested in the reactions, started playing with the fluidity of the ink. And so these kind of things were kind of happening from a very early point. But then I sort of went into art school and started thinking about what is it that I want to say. And so over time, it kind of got interested in to the language of painting itself and kind of trying to make it much more painterly, you know. And so I think those are the kind of concerns that were informing what will later become my style. And I guess to kind of add to that quickly, I guess also is that the reason enamel paint became so important for me was because whenever I was working with ink, for instance, or oil, and even if I was working with those media in a very fluid form, the most exciting thing would be for me was when I would splash the color, and, you know, it would look like, and it was wet and it was moving, and it would look as if it's alive, but at the same time, when it would dry, it would kind of become murkier, or it would kind of lose that kind of vibrancy. And so then, you know, came in enamel paint. And enamel paint, what is exciting about the chemical makeup is that you can splash lots of it and it always looks wet. And so for me, I think the choice of medium is informed by how it retains the spontaneity of making. And so I think that's really informed how I think about painting and how I approach painting.
And tell me about some of the subjects you've chosen to paint over the years, because I remember you telling me how there were always very interesting stories to the figures that you were making and how they often informed your painting of them, and how sometimes you were so moved by those paintings that you needed to the stories that you needed to paint immediately. And also that's why the enamel came into play, because it dried quite quickly. So you had to paint immediately and get everything out there in a sense. I mean, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with Abdullah's work, I've been putting up images of some of it on the Art Divvy, what's it called, stories, and also a post on our page. So you can see that afterwards to see some of the beautiful figures that he does. And we'll talk about some of the film series that he started doing later.
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of explain a bit about how I approached the figures, again, I'll go a bit back. I think from a very early point, I was interested in the autobiography and how kind of complex past or traumatic histories inform your present. And I think that, you know, I guess it's a case for a lot of people who go to college. But for me, it was especially the case where I was kind of grappling with or confronting and difficult histories of my childhood and kind of being lost or feeling lost in London at the time, kind of confronting issues of identity, which a lot of us do at that age, at the age of 19 or 20. And so, you know, that kind of started informing my work a lot more. I started thinking about how limited my exposure was and how limited my experience was of home. And so from there, kind of started thinking about my own memories, and often that would translate in the form of objects of interior, as I call them. So it would be chairs, beds, and drawers, etc., and kind of approach them from a very psychoanalytic way to kind of go over the same memories. In many ways, you know, these memories were difficult for me to kind of process. And so what would happen is that I would kind of revisit those memories over and over again until they felt something that I could live with. In that sense, I was incredibly influenced by the work of Louise Bourgeois or Tracy Emin, who were kind of very much working with troubled pasts, and also working, and in particular Louise Bourgeois, who was speaking a lot about accessing the unconscious. I was very interested in that somehow something happens between, you know, within the act of making. So I was very interested in those kind of ideas at the time. And then, you know, because it kind of became difficult to kind of talk about some of those issues. And so, you know, I kind of started going back and exploring material history as well. So kind of thinking about, you know, how can, what are the issues of abstraction and representation? And that kind of went on for quite a few years. And then it was eventually when I moved back, you know, that I was able to kind of reconcile all of these kind of questions that were emerging within my sort of art school years, that I was able to reconcile at home. I was able to talk with a lot of other artists who either had similar experiences or they had or they were experiencing life very differently, but there were certainly overlaps in experience, and that is what started kind of reconciling a lot of these issues for me. And then quite organically, I sort of arrived in 2016 at, I guess, being exhausted of just making abstract paintings at the time. I wanted to say something much more directly and kind of experience something more directly. So I started, you know, inviting friends over to my studio. And in many cases, like, you know, it was kind of a safe space where I was able to talk about some of the things that I was going through or kind of things that I was thinking about. And likewise, a lot of the people I was painting were close friends. So they were also able to sort of talk about, not only respond to my experiences, but also talk about their own experiences. And in some cases, they were very vulnerable experiences. And I think I wasn't necessarily, I think in that sense, I've always seen the paintings as an output of that experience. And I've not really been as pressed of kind of putting that kind of, putting those stories outside, but really kind of what those moments meant to me. And though that's what the paintings translated as.
And that's
I mean,
what
I
it's
guess
all
a
about,
past,
actually.
sorry?
That's what it's all about as an artist, how you respond to your to around, you know, the stimuli around you. So the stories that you heard, how you responded, that is at the end of the day what the story becomes, your experience of listening to it or being a part of the telling of it in that sense. But
Yeah,
I didn't mean
and
to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
no. So I mean, go on. Were there other thoughts? Because then I can pick up on that.
No. Go ahead.
No, I mean, so I was just saying that I think that apart, so in most cases, the paintings have stood on their own, apart from the solo exhibition that I had at the NCA in 2017, I believe it was. And basically, as part of that, I've transported the living room that I was painting a lot of the people in. So the oil paintings were always done in another studio because it kind of requires much more of a mess. But the watercolors obviously require much more of a clean space. So that would take place in my own living room. And and it was also like a safer space where people could be, you know, I was painting in the winter, so, you know, it gets chilly in Lahore, so it kind of also is a warmer and cozier space. So I remember that, you know, I was painting them in this living room, and I transported that living room to the NCA, and I was kind of present there for the 2 weeks the exhibition was on to be able to speak to people. And then additionally, there was a catalog printed with the exhibition. As part of that, I included 5 anonymous letters that were from the models, talking about some of the stories that were taking place or kind of unfolding within these moments. So I think that that's the only time that I've directly addressed them within the context of these paintings. And then later on, of course, especially within my sort of doctoral project, and the format changes simply because I was interested in more of a narrative. But prior to that, in terms of painting, it's always been about moments.
That's so cool. And I like the idea of you coming back to Lahore in that sense after being away for a couple of years and finding your own safe space within the city, and how your experiences abroad then ended up changing your understanding and perhaps the way that you saw that city. I think that's
Yeah, I
quite
mean,
cool.
interestingly, I was in London for 6 years. I did
Yeah.
my undergraduate and my postgraduate there, and I stayed on an extra year. But what is interesting for me has always been the pull for quote unquote the home. Um,
Yeah.
and literally, I remember that. I mean, I remember that, I used to come back to Pakistan a lot. I used to come almost every 3 months to Pakistan. But I think literally after the completion of my foundation year, which was in 2007, I started the project space, or I mean, it was called Gallery 39K, but now when I
Hmm.
reflect, it kind of appears that it was a project space. And I
Yeah.
started it with two of my mentors, and Rakshanda Twar was one of them. And Rubab Uppal, who was my A-level art teacher, was the other one. And we kind of came together. I had this need always to have matriarchal figures around me, and the
I think
two
it's
of them were
important.
them. And
What a
um,
great experience.
I know it was lovely, and they've been amazing in terms of my artistic journey. And they kind of, I approached them and I said, I have this space. Convinced my grandfather to give me one room and slowly took over the entire house, and basically said that I have this space, let's do something with it. And then, it kind
That's
of,
so enterprising of you as well, because you were super young at this point. What, you were like
I was
19, 20
20.
years old?
Yeah, I was
Yeah, that's
20.
really young to start a great project like that.
Thank you. I mean, at the time, I think it was very much about feeling lost in London because, there were so many
Hmm.
people. I mean, I guess that the program that I was on was so Eurocentric in terms of its approach to art and
Were
theory.
you at St. Were you
Sorry,
at
go
St.
on.
Martin's? Were you at
No,
St.
I was at
Martin's?
Chelsea College of Art
Ah,
in London.
okay, fantastic.
And it was an amazing school, and it was an amazing program. And I think that I look back and sort of really value so many of the exposures that I had. But at the time, I think that I felt incredibly lost, and I felt that, there wasn't enough conversation happening on the kind of identity frameworks that I was interested in or I could relate to. And so there was this kind of process of constantly coming back and kind of creating, at the time, I mean, it wouldn't be called a residency, but it would certainly be called a gathering where, I would put open calls on Facebook and kind of invite artists, non-artists, designers, non-designers to kind of come and work in that space for a period of 1 or 2 months and kind of exhibit in the same space.
In Lahore.
This was in Lahore at
Ah, okay.
39K. And as a result, because of the fact that Rakshanda and I were kind of incredibly dominant voices in that space, what would happen is that we were kind of encouraging and actually pushing for a lot of experimentation, and
Good.
kind of formal and abstract expressionist approaches to kind of art making. And I think that was very much at the time coming from and responding to art making or contemporary art emerging from Pakistan that was incredibly narrative heavy and kind of focused on socio-political issues. Rightly so. I mean, this is the post 9/11 world. But at the time,
Yeah.
as someone who was working with abstraction, I guess I felt that there wasn't enough conversations on those kind of trajectories in Pakistani art history. And because
It's
there is,
important. It's
sorry, go on.
important to have someone pushing these things as well. And sometimes it's important for artists to have mentors such as yourself or Rakshanda pushing them in different directions, not pushing necessarily, but kind of nudging and showing something else that they could be doing. Because you're right, this was a time when abstraction wasn't very much, I think, in vogue in Pakistan, and artists were becoming quite immersed and perhaps a little bit stuck in a particular kind of narrative.
Yeah. I wouldn't call myself a mentor. I think I was very interested in conversations. I think at the time I was working with, I think there were certain things that we were consciously doing. I think
Yeah.
we were making sure that each of these cohorts or groups, whatever we want to call it, were formed of people from different art schools or different backgrounds. And so we would make sure that there were people not only from NCA, there were people from Hunar Kata or Punjab University or Lahore College for Women University. And in some cases, we were really fortunate where we would get people from Zahra University, and they would come down, and it was really interesting. Of course, we had no funding at the time, and I mean we never did throughout the time of 39K, but it was very much kind of like an open invitation that will give you the space, will give you the kind of exhibition venue, and kind of make sure that it's promoted. But you have to kind of come yourself and live in Lahore. So that at the time it was kind of like that.
But that's still such a great offer for all of those artists to come in. And many artists have told me in the past how Lahore was the jewel that they tried to get to. Many of them who grew up in villages outside of Punjab even told me how eventually they kept moving towards Lahore because they'd heard of the art schools there, they'd heard of the culture there. And once they were there, they felt like they'd really made it. So I think 39K probably helped tremendously with that. But Abdullah, I wanted to, I'm sure, but I wanted to also ask you, how did this end up affecting your own art practice? Did you feel that your work changed as a result of this gallery project space?
I think that in the early years, I think it was a massive struggle because, till the very end, I guess I'd say it was a struggle because I think when I started it, there was this pressure that you kind of had to be an artist or a curator. You couldn't be both.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt that, there was the critique that somehow one will be left behind or I won't excel in either. And I think those were the
you did both.
You
excelled in both.
It's kind of you, but I think at the time, I think that, that was in a lot of pressure. And I felt that, I actually started thinking that my painting will be left behind. I thought that painting would become a private activity because it took very long for it to be appreciated. Not long, but it took about 6-7 years for it to be really noticed. But at the time, I think that I felt, that somehow my role is more about organization and bringing people together and things like that, because, what happened was that when I moved back into 2012, by 2013, I started teaching at PIFT, Pakistan Institute of Fashion Design. I designed the Critical and Contextual Studies course for foundation year students. And I also, by August, I started working with the British Council as a senior consultant for arts.
That's fantastic. So you were really busy when you got back.
Yeah, I was lucky that I got busy immediately, but all the roles that were kind of coming my way were either in education or arts management. So I kind of felt that, okay, well, this is God telling me something, and, maybe painting will always be, or art making will always be a private activity.
Well, I'm glad the light bulb came on at some point and that you continued on with your painting because you're managing everything so well. I know that you're still obviously doing research, you're still managing your painting, and now you even started moving towards films. Well, art films, obviously.
So 2016, I think, was that moment where I kind of resigned from everything. I shut down 39K. I left my teaching jobs and also British Council and started full-time painting. It was a leap of faith because I really did not know how it would kind of turn out, and of course I'm lucky that it worked out. But it started with painting, and it started with thinking about so many of the questions that I was interested in. I think the pressure with 39K was that it was a regular space, and I think it expected to put on shows every month or every few weeks, and which meant that I could not necessarily focus on just the projects that were linked to my own research interests. And I think after 2016, what has happened is that I've been much more selective about the projects that I've been interested in. And as a result, I've been able to give more to those projects intellectually, and in terms of my own sort of resources and kind of getting the funding that I may need, etc. So in that sense, it's been incredible. and focused, I've become much more clear about the kind of curatorial projects I'm interested in. So, for instance, I think that one of the consistent threads that emerged has been that I'm interested in non-traditional spaces. I'm interested in methods of organization and collaboration. I'm interested in working outside the white cube. So I think those are things that, kind of have really become much more visible in how I approach these projects now.
Wonderful. And tell me some of the projects that you've curated recently, just to sort of narrow down your interest even further. So in Lahore, I remember 2 years ago, you curated a great project with Andasha Malik. Recently, you called River in an Ocean. And recently, I think late 2019, you curated a project in Helsinki as well. Would you like to speak a little bit about those?
So I think some of the projects, the co-curated projects, I mean, there's two major projects that I did. So there was, of course, River in an Ocean that you mentioned. And before that, it was Isai Ke Parcham Tale with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And both of these projects kind of became kind of how I wanted to work, and working with large numbers of artists, but also kind of working in either different spaces or different kind of or specific kind of issues that are rooted in social justice, for instance. And I think that kind of became much more clear. What happened in Helsinki is very much linked to my PhD project, and that kind of comes at builds upon a lot of these kind of concerns of social justice. So I guess one of the things that started happening was that when I started my PhD, one of the major global event that had just happened was the so-called European migrant crisis. And as part of that, in Finland, we had a lot of LGBT immigrants who were coming in as refugees and asylum seekers. And a lot of the people that I spoke to, for instance, were escaping Iraq, where there was honor killing. And I got really interested in that. And, and also it's a community that, in some ways I'm part of, but also like, I'm kind of, I just felt like I wanted to interrogate some of those questions further, right? So I think that, that became the starting point for this project. And I guess because the format of my PhD is visual, and what that means is that it's kind of there's the possibility to take to incorporate artistic components as part of that research. So I started thinking about it in imaginative ways, and kind of looking at the questions and the journeys and the challenges of a lot of these immigrants, framing them in what I call mythologies. And the reason I think it became important was because on one level, so many of these people were escaping home because the dominant cultures in their societies were rejecting who they were on a fundamental level, whether they were in terms of their sexuality or gender. But equally, when they came into Europe, they were experiencing further exclusion because of racism or Islamophobia or the general anti-immigrant sentiment. And so I got interested in this kind of double exclusion that was taking place with this community. And so to kind of talk about that, then the mythological framework comes in. Theoretically and conceptually, I also look at a lot of Sufi frameworks. And the reason for that is because so much of Sufism is kind of rooted in, so much of Sufism takes a non-heteronormative position within Islamic history. And so I guess, and so much of Sufism kind of permeates Pakistani culture and society with the amount of shrines that we have. I mean, I grew up with so many of the stories of different Sufis that were kind of told anecdotally. And so that kind of has started informing how I approach mythologies as a way of talking about migration. And
such an interesting idea as well.
To
use that sort of larger framework when you're discussing fairly complicated ideas as well.
Well, I mean, it's something that I'm kind of trying to figure out. And the Burak, of course, like when you're in Pakistan, you see the Burak as a figure on so many things. It appears on trucks, and it kind of appears, you can go to the barber shop and it would be kind of on, like, printed on a calendar. So, it was kind of part of my visual vocabulary for a long time. And
Yeah.
so I started approaching that figure and kind of thinking about this kind of the night journey and the journey to the Char Bagh, which are 4 gardens described in heaven.
I just want to pause you for a minute, because it's been about 30 minutes. Everybody who's joined recently, I'm talking to Abdullah Qureshi, who's based currently in Toronto. He's from Lahore, grew up there, and he's speaking about his larger art practice. And Abdullah's work, actually, which he's sort of coming towards right now from the conversation, I can tell. Journey to Char Bagh is a new film project that he did, and I exhibited it recently in Lahore at the Sagar Theatre exhibition as a collateral to the Lahore Biennale that many of you hopefully visited. And it was a stunning filmic project. And Abdullah wanted to say what wonderful reviews we received, what great comments. People would go inside and stand for several cycles of the piece, actually. And please continue about what it was. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just thought it'd be good
that's really nice to hear, because I think that when I made that work, I think the struggle was that because it was made as part of my PhD project and exhibited in Helsinki as part of a larger event, but the kind of approach which was poetic and kind of rooted in such specific symbolism, I really did not want to dilute it. I did not want to kind of dilute it just because it was being exhibited in Helsinki. I actually wanted to retain the complexity of that. And I think that what was remarkable, and I think I certainly was not expecting that when I showed it in Lahore at your show, so many people got it and so many people engaged with it. And I think that that was really beautiful for me. And I'm really grateful for that. I think that, it was that entire film has been an incredible collaboration. I had a lot of people working with me. So, one of the directors, there were 2 directors of photography. There was Hadi Rehman in Lahore and Kertu Hakarainen in Finland. And in Lahore, in particular, I was able to kind of put together an incredible group of people who were dealing with a lot of these issues through artistic frameworks already. And so I think they were able to bring in a lot of their own perspectives, which was a beautiful collaborative component of this project.
And Hadi came in to see it with a friend of his, and I remember they really enjoyed the installation, because I don't know whether I ever told you this, but the ceiling started dripping in the theater because it was quite old when it rained. And there was an area underneath your film that the water rose in. And because the film was reflecting quite beautifully, we just left it. Plus, there wasn't anything we could do about it at the time. And the water stayed like that for about 10 days. And people thought it was part of the installation. And I think when Hadi came in with a friend of his who was also who was also part of your production team, they really enjoyed that. Oh, good. Hi, Hadi.
So, no, I mean, I think that was, just to sort of interject here, I think that was a remarkable thing that happened, because in Helsinki, when it was exhibited, so I'll give you the context of how it kind of manifested in Helsinki, because one of the issues that I look as part of my PhD is the kind of exclusions that took place. And in the beginning, around 2016 and 2017, one of the things that was happening in Helsinki was that a lot of these immigrants, these LGBT immigrants, were facing, there was a particular pattern of rejections that was taking place at queer nightclubs in Helsinki. Mm-hmm. And so I got interested in that, and there's been protests about that. That's been written about in the papers as well, and I've written about it separately. And it's not a phenomenon that is that is unique to Finland. It's been happening across Europe in different ways. Mm. So the nightclub became a space to kind of engage with as one of the spaces of exclusion. And so the film was exhibited in that. So what was incredible was that the 4 gardens was mimicked on the dance floor, but there was a reflection, like there was a projection of 2 waters, that 2 bodies of water meeting in that particular installation, in the initial setup in Helsinki. So it was remarkable that when it was exhibited in Lahore, by coincidence, the kind of puddle of water forms.
By the way, everybody who's asking questions, I just wanted to say we're going to be addressing them at the end of the conversation. So please stick around. We will go through your questions and Abdullah will answer anything that you have to ask.
Yeah.
Please keep typing them out if you'd like, but we'll address them at the end just because I feel it sometimes interrupts the conversation, as I just did to poor Abdullah.
No, it's okay. I mean, we can start addressing them quite naturally. I think that, in many ways we've addressed a lot of what we wanted to.
Yeah.
And I think that, we can pick up and go into details as other questions come into.
Yeah. But I did want to ask you, Abdullah, about a couple of important moments that you felt have shaped. I mean, you've spoken about some of them, but are there any others that have really had an impact on your work or larger life? Is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
I mean, I think that in the most recent years, I think what has, and this is kind of also informing this kind of shift much more to kind of film as well as, I mean, I think the fact that I started doing my PhD, one, it kind of became a research project, but also the fact that I was lucky enough to receive a stable grant for a certain amount of years. I think that's changed how I work a lot. The fact that there is production money and the fact that it is stable income has actually allowed me to take more risks in how I work. It's allowed me to kind of approach other funding bodies to create more kind of experimental projects. I think with in Pakistan, I mean, especially after I quit my kind of day jobs, the challenge was, of course, how do I sustain myself, right? And
in the art, it's becoming even harder. I mean, right now as well, there have been so many layoffs, so many furloughs. So that's really remarkable to have in a time like this, and just generally as well for a couple of years. And you mentioned that the PhD is also visual art based, so everything that you create falls within that too. Is that correct?
Well, not everything. I think that there's a lot of things. For instance, I'm drawing and painting right now. It may inform my thinking, but I don't think that I'm including that as a research output. I mean, so within the context of my research project, there's 2 visual chapters, and one of them is called Chapter 1, the nightclub, which took place last year in Helsinki. Details of that and video footage of that is on my website, so if people want to see. And that was like a 2-hour event that took place at a nightclub. It included the premiere of the film Journey to the Charbagh, but it also
We had a question earlier, Abdullah, sorry, but it was about the content of the film. Do you want to describe it a little bit to say what happened in the film?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that I was very interested in kind of imaginative concepts that kind of come from Islam, and the prominent figure is that of the Buraq. And the Buraq is described, I mean, it's not mentioned in the Quran, but it's described in sayings of the Prophet, in Sahih Bukhari in particular, as this kind of cross between, kind of something between a mule and a donkey. And it has a handsome face. And of course, if you look at art history, in particular in Mughal, Ottoman, and Persian traditions, the Buraq has manifested in so many different ways throughout time. And similarly with the concept of the Charbagh, the 4 gardens, that's also been translated quite literally in a lot of the architecture. So we see that in the Lahore Fort, we see that in Shalimar Gardens, we see that in Nakshe-Jahan Square in Isfahan. So, it's kind of present throughout time. And I was interested in kind of visiting those spaces and kind of thinking about it, and, kind of thinking about the notions of jinns or the Shams and Qamar and things like that. So I think it's quite kind of
very mystical.
It's taking a lot of those ideas and kind of trying to kind of work with them in a poetic way. And so poetry forms a very important component of that project. And we had 2 poets that contributed to that project, and that was incredible. And so it kind of is poetic, and then it was complemented by a live performance by Mira Band, which is led by a Palestinian woman. And it's a Helsinki-based band, and they did live music over there. And then, we had Tamara Al-Mashouk, who's a Saudi British artist, Saudi artist based in London. And, she presented her video. And then, of course, there was the live performance by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto.
Quite a celebration in a
It was
way.
quite an incredible experience
Yeah.
because in many ways, so many of these people were looking at different issues. They were covers of old songs, so bringing the past into the present. Zulfikar was, of course, looking at working with the framework of a zombie, so coming back from the future to the present.
Thank
Tamara was
you.
responding to the fetishization and the white gaze in particular. So there were a lot of issues, and I was kind of working as an introduction in this kind of realm of poetry and mythologies, kind of framing the whole
Wonderful.
thing. And so it was kind of a combined artistic curatorial project. And the reason I don't I mean, I think, and going back to an earlier point, I think in the early days I struggled with both these roles and kind of wanted to keep them separate as much as possible. But I think now within the framework of my PhD, at least, the methodologies that I'm really interested in are that of organization and collaboration. So it kind of allows me to occupy
It all
multiple
comes
positions,
together. Yeah.
so I think that's been incredible.
How did
Um,
people in Helsinki react, or people who visited this? Did they
I
all
mean,
understand and enjoy the mystical, mythological
I don't know. I
scenarios
don't know
as
if
well?
I don't know if how much. I mean, I don't think we had conversations on how much they understood the mythologies, but certainly it was
But they
appreciated
enjoyed
in
it.
an overwhelming
Yeah.
way. There was a lot of emotion. There were people crying because you have to bear in
Wow.
mind that a lot of the immigrants who were present in that particular event and had kind of their stories interpreted or their voices represented, even through other artistic people. I think there was a lot of emotion because they were kind of reclaiming a space in Helsinki and kind of having themselves heard. And a lot of allies were there as well. A lot of Finnish allies were there. And there was generally a lot of emotion. There was a lot of people who started requesting songs that were coming
Oh,
from
that's
different
special.
geographies, and
Yeah.
and people were crying. It was just incredible. And those were again things that I did not kind of anticipate when putting the project together. And that's something that I'm kind of thinking about and reflecting upon as I now
Abdullah,
go towards the writing part.
a lot of people who came to see the film in Lahore ended up crying as well. I have a few friends who came in and they kept telling me that like this is the third time we've seen this and this is the third time we've cried because again it just pulls out so much emotion.
It's really
And I
kind.
think that no, it's true. And I think sometimes, at least for me, when you see or you're in a situation where you feel your emotions and the secrets you've kept inside have finally been understood, or the trauma that you're dealing with on a daily basis, if you feel that there's a community that gets it, that unleashes floodgates, really. And I'm sure all of those people must have felt so blessed and grateful to be in a scenario where their voices were finally understood by like-minded people. That's wonderful.
Very kind. Thank you.
And tell me what is going on, like what is next after the PhD? Now you haven't finished it yet, but now you've moved to
No. So
Toronto.
I mean, right now there's no next. Right now it's just the PhD. So until the end of December 2021, I'm going to be working on chapter 2. So obviously, because of
Okay.
the current situation, there was the event. The second event was planned end of May, and we postponed it right now to September. But it's all
Okay.
obviously very much in the air still. There was a lot of. It was a 5-day event that was planned at multiple venues in Helsinki.
And
Um,
that's going to be chapter 5 of the PhD, you said?
Chapter two, the
Okay, sorry,
dark
chapter
room,
2.
and basically,
Yeah.
basically, like it had a lot of international people coming. There were at least 4 artists that were part. There were 2 shows being planned. We had people coming who collaborated with the Journey to the Charbagh from Lahore, and so there was
Oh,
a lot of kind of components to that project. But of
yeah.
course, we don't know what international travel will look like in the
Fingers
next few
crossed.
months or even a year. So let's see.
Yeah.
I think it's all a bit in the air, and we will kind of move step by step, one day at a time. But nevertheless, I'm also reading and writing and trying to kind of finish or work towards that goal of submitting my dissertation with all the artistic components by the end of December 2021. And then we can talk about another conversation and what's next.
No, that makes a whole sense. By the way, I heard you saying earlier, that you are painting right now. Is there anything that we can see? And before we do that, I wanted to highlight the painting behind me, which is one of yours. I'm sorry it's not lit quite correctly. But
That's okay. I'll quickly show, like, I mean, I spread them out on. So, I mean, what I've been doing is that I've been, keeping myself busy with inks and things like that. That's my coffee. That's my stash of paper. And then I just kind of spread them on the
wow.
floor. And oftentimes these are kind of paintings that are either self-portraits because I'm on the phone all the time looking at myself. So I'm kind of painting alongside, or
These are
sometimes when I'm talking to other
fantastic.
people, I'm just quickly doing portraits of them. It's really just to maintain sanity that I was able to join a life drawing class in New York online, and that was kind of some of the drawings came out of that. But so yeah,
Oh, that
so it's
must have
been,
been such a good experience. It's wonderful that those sort of things are happening right now.
yeah, these are just like really just fun things that I'm trying to do and
I
kind
love
of
these.
keep myself busy. But yeah,
Yeah.
so shall we move to some of the questions?
Yes, let's do that. Let's do the questions. Okay. You can see them as well, right?
Yeah,
You
I
can kind
can.
of
But
scroll back
it
and
will be
forth.
easier, I guess, if you just pick them because that would make it. So I
Okay.
saw one
Oh, there are
of the
quite a
questions
lot.
was 39K should reopen again, and will it open again? I think it's really unlikely that 39K will open in the way that it was. I think one of the things that's happened with 39K that in 2016 when I kind of closed it, I was interested in forming a very different way of supporting, and that's something that's been ongoing. So I mean, this was also a year after that my grandfather passed away, so I was able to start a scholarship called Shamim Safra's Scholarship for Cultural Studies, and
Oh, that's
that's something that
fantastic.
works with the Cultural Studies department at the NCA, and it supports one MPhil student who's a needs-based student, annually. And that's something that we've been working on for the last 3 years now. There are specific focuses. We're interested in specific conversations, and there's different kind of frameworks that we've used as a way of testing, and hopefully that's something that can expand in the coming years. I mean, we often form a jury, and there are kind of nominations. Well, it wouldn't be nominations. So basically, the department sends us everyone who qualifies for the scholarship based on the requirements that we've set. And
Fantastic.
then, then an independent panel is formed, and then the panel comes and arrives at a decision on who will get the scholarship for that year. So it's something that I've been running since 39K, and I'm hoping that, when it's been 5 years or something, then, we will have a significant number of researchers that have come out, and maybe something will
Wonderful.
emerge from that. So that's one of the ideas post 39K. And I don't know, like right now I'm still working on events. So as a physical space, maybe it won't exist in the same way, but maybe 10 years down the line, something else will come up. Who knows?
But even the scholarship program, I'm not sure if there are many like it focused on research and the arts. So
I
that's
mean, well,
great
there's
that you've
not that
started
many
that.
research degrees that are related to art
Yeah.
in Pakistan. I know that, I mean, I spoke to Zermine at IVS, and I know that they were starting an undergraduate program at the time. I think BNU has started now. So there's a few emerging. But I mean, I'm hoping that, there will be more kind of formal systems established, formal institutes
Mm.
established that can support existing bodies and existing kind of programs to kind of improve them. I think that's the most important thing, rather than kind of forming smaller things that are kind of independent. Although there's an incredible
Yeah,
need for
agreed.
that, I'm also interested in kind of working in this dual way that we can have independent projects, but I think we also need to work with existing institutions and kind of make them stronger and more stable.
Yeah, that's very true. We answered one of the questions about what's next for you already. The name of the film that we were discussing is Journey to Charbagh, and it was first shown in Helsinki in 2019 and then in Lahore in early 2020 in the exhibition that I curated. And then again, it was part of a show in Karachi, I understand.
It was part of the
That,
show in Karachi. It was shown
yes,
in Oslo in Norway, and it was also shown in
wonderful.
it was shown in Havana in Cuba, which was one of the most beautiful experiences. Yeah,
Did you go as well,
yeah,
or
I was
was
there.
it
It
just,
was really nice.
oh,
It was
that's
at La
fantastic.
Fábrica de Arte Cubano, and it was just an incredible venue and an incredible experience.
I really want to go to Cuba actually before it completely opens up to everybody. But
Well,
how lucky that you're able to do that. Um, People were also asking earlier, where can they watch the film now? Is it going to be available online at all, or?
well, right now it's not available online, but maybe a year and a half down the line we will. We're still hoping to show it through a few festivals. So my producer and I, Denai Anagnoscu, who's Helsinki based, we've been putting it forward to some of the festivals. So we're hoping that it will still get to travel. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, I mean, in the current climate, so much has changed. But there may
Right.
be online screenings that are planned. And then, of course, I will share the link and you can share with the followers as well. And then people can
Yeah,
see it.
it's an absolutely beautiful film.
Thank you.
Um, does anybody have any more questions that they may want to ask? Oh, what inspired the work behind me is a question. Abdullah,
Oh,
would you
that's
like to
a
take
friend
that
of
one
mine,
on?
Manam. That's Manam's painting. And yeah, so it was just like, I mean, I think that it's different people that I was inviting to come to my studio. So this was a friend of mine. And interestingly, so this was a couple of paintings that were painted together because that friend of mine has an identical twin. So I painted both of them together, and that was a fun
Oh,
thing.
of course. Oh, how I didn't realize it was Manam actually. I finally understood who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Abdullah, when can I expect my painting? Is that something that we can chat about?
Yes, I'm sure. Like whenever I'm painting again in Pakistan, maybe, or whenever we cross paths, why not?
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to ask or comment to Abdullah? We've received many wonderful comments about how much they enjoy 39K. What an amazing initiative. Somebody's sending us lots of love, which is great.
Lots of people saying hello to everyone. Yeah, yeah.
Great. Then I think we are almost done. And Abdullah, I also wanted to thank you for something else, which I'm not sure if I've done properly over all of this time. Thank you again for coming and supporting me in Venice over the
No,
summer.
it
I
was a
can't
pleasure
tell you.
to be there. That was
It
an
was
incredible.
almost a year ago, and I am so, so grateful to you. So Abdullah very kindly flew all the way to Venice to support the, first Pakistan Pavilion, the Venice Art Biennale, which I curated, and I'm always so grateful to him for that. Oh, here we go. Someone else is asking quickly, how was your experience studying in Helsinki as a brown man? Is that something you'd like to address?
I have to say that I think the university. I mean, yeah. So Helsinki, Finland is definitely like not the most racially diverse spaces. Personally, I haven't had a problem working in at the university because it's a fairly international setup. But I know that certain colleagues have certainly struggled in so many different ways. So I think that I mean, I'll talk about it from a theoretical way. I think one of the discourses that is prominent in Finland is that of invisible whiteness, and that's really the crux of the issue, at least how I see it, is that after the Second World War, when the UK, Germany, and France, for instance, went through I'm simplifying the discourse, but when they kind of went through a self-reflective phase, um, like self-reflective post-colonial moment, which of course still has so many problems and such a long way to go. But I mean, in Finland, they kind of skipped that, so to speak. Like, they kind of
Mm,
felt that they didn't have a part to play in the colonial empires. And so the same level of critical reflection did not take place. And of course, they had their own issues as well. They were colonized by Sweden, and there was kind of invasions from Russia. So there were kind of complex, tense histories on that end internally as well. And so it wasn't really until the so-called European migrant crisis that many of these kind of issues started to surface
popped up.
more prominently, and that's where a lot of the issues are being addressed. I have to say that, and again, I think that I've been lucky in this respect. That I mean, to date, I've experienced two or three racist incidents in Helsinki, but each time someone else locally has stood up for me, and I think
That's
that that
fantastic.
that has been remarkable. And I don't think that, I mean, it's something remarkable because it certainly does not happen in a lot of other places. And I found that, you know, even though the Finnish public, like the Finns, are generally very quiet, but they're not. They can be incredibly supportive in their own way, and I think that's been my experience, but it's certainly different for different people.
No, that's so important. Abdullah, very quickly before you leave, I have one last little question. I wanted to ask you how you measure success. You've already achieved so much at such a young age. I mean, you started the gallery and you were barely 20 years old. Your work as an artist is renowned globally. Well, it is. And you've exhibited in so many different places. You've started your PhD already. Do you have advice for young artists who are inspiring curators, perhaps?
I mean,
Is there anything you would tell
it's gonna
them?
sound a bit cliche, because I think
Yeah,
that,
it's a cliche question.
I mean, I mean, on one level, I think that, on one level, I don't think that I see myself as, I see myself as doing very well. I know that I've been successful and all of that, but at the same time, I think there's always a drive to kind of excel,
Of
and
course.
kind of achieve more, but not necessarily. I don't think I'm interested in uh, specific opportunities that kind of, uh, well, there aren't specific goals that are kind of like have to be kind of centrally located. I mean, although it would be great, you know, to have that validation, but I think that on some level, I think I'm guided by spontaneity and intuition, and kind of end up in working with people that I'm interested to work with. And so I kind of, that draws me, or locations that I'm interested in visiting, and I'm kind of interested towards that. But I think over time, one of the things that has worked well for me, and I think, you know, is kind of, you know, although I have so many friends from the art world, I think that one of the things that I've done consciously over time is try and keep my personal and professional lives very separate.
Yeah,
Um, and so
that's very good advice.
I think over time, I think in Pakistan especially, and I guess a lot of places in the world, but you know, because so many people go to undergraduate together at, you know, at the NCA and whatnot, or IVS, and those friends become friends for life, and that's amazing to have. But then there's also, like, you know, I think tensions emerge when you're professionally working as well. So I think over time, I've been lucky that my core group of friends has been non-artistic. Those are the people
And
that
that's also sometimes more interesting for inspiration when you don't have artist friends
yeah,
only
they keep you
and you have a
grounded.
wider,
Like they keep
yeah,
you,
exactly.
they keep you
And you
grounded.
learn about different things. You learn about philosophy, about science, physics, business. It's all really important to also have an interest in those things. I think our video might end actually very
Cool.
shortly. So thank you so much, Abdullah, for this wonderful hour that you've given us. And thank you, everybody, for being the most wonderful audience and for sticking with us. I hope to see you guys next week, same time, hopefully with a different dynamic artist. Thanks
Thank
again.
you for having me, and thank you to everyone who joined. It's been a pleasure speaking here.
All right.
Bye.
Bye,
Lots of
guys.
love
See
to
you.
everyone.